Okay, we are now going to start the chapter of communication. All right, and let's start from the first concept. So, communication is the exchange of information between people. Okay, exchange of information, but in business we are less concerned with communication, we are less concerned with the exchange of information, we are more concerned with what has been called effective communication. Now, what is effective communication? Effective communication is that communication which gets me the desired response. Now, whenever I'm communicating with someone, I'm communicating with a purpose. The purpose is to get a feedback, the purpose is to get a response. So if my communication is giving me that desired response, that communication is useful, that communication is effective. Now, let's say if I say stand up, if I say to my student stand up, and that student actually stands up, okay, then that means that communication is effective. It has got me the result that I desired, that I wanted. But let's say I say stand up, and the student just keeps looking at me and does not give me any response. Okay. Now, if the student is not giving me any response, the message may have been communicated in some form, the message may have been exchanged in some form, but it is not effective. So, in order to be effective, I must get the desired feedback, the feedback that I desire. Okay. And that brings me then to the concept of effective communication, which cannot take place without the presence of the communication cycle. Now, what is the communication cycle? Now, the communication cycle, first, let us look at, uh, in order to make communication effective, so there are two things: the message must be received and the message must be understood as desired by the sender. Receiving is not enough, it should be received and understood. If the message is received but it is not understood as desired, the communication is not going to be effective. So, for communication to be effective, then there are four elements that must be present. There should be a sender. Okay, the sender who is going to actually transmit the message. There has to be the message itself, the clear message. There must be a receiver. Okay, and that receiver is important because he is the ultimate party that's going to give us the response. So if I am sending the message and the message is being received but it's not understood, I mean, I'm sending the message in one language and the person doesn't understand the language, then the person can strain his or her ears, but they will not understand. So if the message is received all right but not understood, then communication is not effective. On the other hand, just look at this communication. Here nothing is said. uh, the student doesn't have to shout her lungs out. All she is doing is she's raising her hand. And raising her hand sends not just a message, but a clear message to the teacher, which is interpreted by the teacher. And she gives the student the attention that she desires. So the student gets the desired response. This is effective communication. So, if the message has been sent but no feedback has been received, sorry, communication has failed. So, that brings me to the communication cycle, the communication loop, which must always be there, which is always there, which now incorporates all those elements of effective communication. And let's look at those elements as they play out in the communication cycle. There is the sender. Okay, what does the sender do? The sender is responsible for encoding the message. Encoding means he is responsible for putting the message in the right code. The code is the language. He is responsible for putting in language, he is responsible for articulating the message which he has in his mind. That can be a letter, that can be a sentence that you speak, that can be a computer language or a computer app, anything. The codes must be relevant there. On the other end, there's the recipient. Now, what does the receiver do? What does the recipient do? He receives the message and then he decodes the message. The message has been received. It's just like you have received a letter, but now you have to read it. The reading process is the decoding process. Decoding means deciphering, decoding means understanding. You need to read and understand. But let's say you know English, your language is English, but the letter is written in Arabic. So, yeah, the sender has encoded it in one code, but that code you cannot understand, you cannot decipher. So, you will not be able to understand what has been sent to you. The communication will fail, the communication channel. So, it's the job of the sender to encode the message in codes which can be easily decoded or understood or deciphered by the receiver. Now, once the sender encodes the message, he has to send it through the channel. The channel is the thing which carries the message from the sender to the receiver. Okay. So the channel is the other element in the communication cycle. And finally, at the top of the channel you see something called noise. So noise is basically something which hinders the communication process. It can be physical noise, it can be it can be you saying something but people all around you are shouting, so your voice is not being carried forward to the listener. So that's physical noise. But it can be physical noise, it can also be psychological noise. You are sending me a message but I don't like you, so I'm not going to receive the message like you desire me to receive it. That's also noise. It's something that hinders, anything that hinders the communication process. Now just look at it. This is an animal, and if my language, if my code is English, then I'm going to say this is a horse. I'm going to code it in the English language. I'm going to code my message in the English language and I'll send it. And if the receiver understands English, then he'll be able to understand. But for the same animal, if I don't speak English, I speak Urdu or Hindi, then I'm going to use a different code. The code for this is Ghoda, and then the receiver will then decode this word. He will decipher this word, and he will make sense that yeah, I'm talking about a particular animal. So another example here, you receive a letter in the Arabic language. It's coded in Arabic. It's coded in the Arabic language. This is a message. The code is Arabic, but it's going to make no sense to me. Why? Because I don't have the ability to decode this language. I don't have the ability to decipher, understand. So it's the job of the sender. Let's look at another thing. You speak Arabic, but you receive a letter in Hebrew. Okay, your Arabic is very good, you can decipher Arabic, but you receive the sender sends you this time the letter in Hebrew. You are not going to understand. Why? You do not have the ability to decipher these codes. So that is the most important thing. The message cannot go forward without the code. The code can be a language, it can be symbols, it can be a gesture, it can be a wag of the finger, it can be a raise of the eyebrow, it can be anything as long as it can convey, encode a message. Okay, and that code is then understood by the receiver. So the path through which this information goes from one place to another, that is the medium, that is the communication channel, and that is very important. Now, what are these communication channels? It can be face to face communication. Okay, in face to face communication, what is carrying the message? The air is carrying the message. The air is your main medium. But face to face communication, that is your channel. Video conferencing these days, very important channel of communication. All right, telephone, the telephonic communication. Okay, uh, all these are communication methods as long as encoding is taking place by the sender, decoding is taking place by the receiver, right? And the the more clarity that a medium engenders, the more clarity that it can create, the richer the medium becomes, the better the medium becomes. Okay, so let's look at this. So in this picture, what's happening? This person is trying to understand something. She's reading Shakespeare and she's trying to understand it. And what does Shakespeare say? He says, "When devils will the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows." Okay, amazing Elizabethan English, amazing English of the time. But people of our time cannot easily decipher, they cannot easily understand what this is until they understand what certain words meant at that. But devils will the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows. All Shakespeare is trying to say is that when people want to do something bad to you, they first uh, try pretend that they are your friends, right? So uh, it's important to get behind somebody before you can stab them in the back, something like that. So that's what he's saying. All he's trying to say is that people sometimes try to be your friends, but in reality they are not. So that's the real devil in them. That's the real that's the really evil side which Shakespeare is trying to bring across. And then the most important thing after this communication and this decoding is what? Feedback. Just imagine, this is this is an 18th century general, and he has an army behind him. There's cavalry, and he says just one word: charge. And that one word needs to be interpreted by every soldier in the same way. They all have to give him a response. They all have to move together against the enemy. And the only word is charge. But if the message is misunderstood, then just keep in mind that, in the olden times, we had these telephones, where the lines were not very good, and there used to be a lot of noise in the phones, and the message was not understood. And all the time he was saying, "Yeah, what are you saying? What are you saying?" And then the message was understood, partly understood. Communication was not very good. But please do keep in mind, noise is not just physical. Okay, noise can be anything. Now, in this situation, the situation that you are seeing right now, the person who's talking, he's a misogynist. He doesn't like women. Okay, he has a very negative opinion about the ability of women to do the work. So no matter how well this person works, no matter what she says, he interprets it, her message is not interpreted the way she wants to. Why? Because the person has a bias. That bias also is hindering the communication process. And anything that hinders the communication process is noise. It can be physical sound, it can be a bias, it can be an opinion, it can be an attribute, it can be anything. As long as it hinders the communication cycle, it is noise. Okay, so thank you very much. In the next video, then I'll discuss the consequences of these. Thank you.